She handed me the divorce papers at my retirement party. I set them down on the table next to my cake, picked up my fork, and took a bite. That was 4 years ago. I want to tell you what happened after. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 38 years building something from nothing, and the people who were supposed to love me tried to take it apart in a single afternoon. They almost succeeded. Almost. I grew up in rural Ohio, the son of a mechanic and a school librarian. We didn't have much, but we had enough, and my parents made sure I understood the difference between the two. My father used to say that a man who knows the difference between want and need will never be poor for long. I believed him. I still do. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina when I was 24 with $1,100 in my checking account and a degree in civil engineering from Ohio State. I got a job with a mid-sized construction firm, kept my head down, learned everything I could, and by the time I was 32, I had my own company. By 45, we were doing municipal infrastructure contracts across the Southeast. Roads, bridges, drainage systems. Not glamorous, but necessary. The kind of work that holds a city together without anyone ever stopping to notice. I was good at it. I won't pretend otherwise. I bought a house in a neighborhood called Eastover, which is one of the older, quieter parts of Charlotte. Big oak trees, wide lots, brick sidewalks. My wife and I raised our son Andrew in that house. When she passed 7 years ago, breast cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, I stayed in the house because I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Her garden was still out back. Her reading chair was still in the corner of the study. Some things you don't move. Andrew grew up watching me work. I thought that meant he understood what work was. I was wrong about that. He was a smart kid, good in school, graduated from UNC Chapel Hill with a finance degree, got a position at an investment firm in Atlanta. I was proud. I told him so. I also gave him too much, too early. A car when he turned 22, help with his first apartment, money when things were tight. I told myself I was being a good father. Looking back, I was making a problem. He met Vanessa at a charity fundraiser in Atlanta when he was 29. She was 31, worked in commercial real estate, and from the first time I met her, I could tell she was conducting an assessment. She smiled at me, the way you smile at a building you're considering buying. Everything with Vanessa was a transaction. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's true. And because I wish I had trusted that observation when I first made it. Andrew was smitten. I understand that. She was beautiful and confident, and she made him feel like he had arrived somewhere. I kept my mouth shut because he was an adult, and it wasn't my place. I told myself that. They dated for 2 years. Andrew proposed at a restaurant in Buckhead. He called me beforehand, which I appreciated. He asked if I could help with the ring. I said yes and wrote a check for $12,000. The ring was lovely. Vanessa sent me a thank you text. One text, no call, no handwritten note. I noticed. The wedding planning started almost immediately after the engagement. Vanessa's parents lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, and they were, I will say this carefully, comfortable. Her father had sold a landscaping franchise operation years earlier, and they lived well. They drove nice cars and took nice vacations and said all the right things. But when the wedding budget came up, suddenly there were a lot of vague responses. Her father had some investments that were in a transition period. Her mother had some health expenses, nothing specific, nothing concrete, just fog. Andrew came to me in the fall of the year before the wedding. We were sitting in my kitchen in Charlotte, and he had a spreadsheet open on his laptop. The venue alone was going to be $300,000. It was a plantation-style estate outside of Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of place with Spanish moss and a long drive lined with live oaks. Vanessa had chosen it before they had looked at a single other option. I looked at the number on the screen. I looked at my son. He said Vanessa's parents would cover 30%. He asked if I could cover the rest. I want to be honest with you. I hesitated. Something in me said to slow down, to have a longer conversation, to ask more questions. But Andrew was sitting there, looking at me with that particular expression that children have when they are asking their parents to believe in them, and I said yes. I said I would cover it. $210,000. I also agreed to pay for the rehearsal dinner, a private room at a restaurant called Husk in Charleston, one of the nicer places in the city, and to cover the hotel block rate for out-of-town guests, which was a deal I negotiated with a hotel on East Bay Street. I put everything on a business credit card and told my accountant. The wedding was scheduled for the third Saturday in May. In the months leading up to it, I noticed things, small things, the kind that don't feel like much individually, but that accumulate. Vanessa referred to my house, the one I'd lived in for over 20 years, as that old place. She asked Andrew once, within my earshot, whether I had thought about right-sizing. I knew what that word meant. She meant selling it, taking the money, putting me somewhere smaller. Andrew laughed it off. I didn't say anything. At Christmas, 5 months before the wedding, Vanessa asked me if I had updated my estate planning. We were standing in my kitchen, and she was looking at the built-in bookcases my wife had specifically requested when we renovated. I said my affairs were in order. She smiled and said she just wanted to make sure everyone was protected. I said I agreed. I also called my attorney in January and made some changes to my will, quietly, without telling anyone. I'm getting ahead of myself. The week before the wedding, I flew into Charleston and checked into a hotel room I had arranged at my own expense, separately from the block. I wanted space. I wanted to be able to close the door and be alone. I've learned, at this stage of my life, that I need that. The rehearsal dinner was on a Friday evening and it went smoothly enough. Vanessa's parents were there, her father Len, a large red-faced man who laughed loudly at his own jokes, her mother Sandy, who wore a lot of jewelry and touched Vanessa's arm constantly in a way that seemed less affectionate and more territorial. Andrew was relaxed, happy. I sat at the head table and watched my son laugh and thought, I love him. Whatever else is true, I love him. Saturday morning I woke up at 6 and had coffee on the small balcony of my hotel room. The sky was that particular shade of pale pink that only happens over water. I thought about my wife. I thought about what she would have said, what she would have worn, how she would have fussed over Andrew's boutonniere. I gave myself 10 minutes with that, and then I put it away. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon in the rose garden of the estate. There were approximately 200 guests. I know this because I had reviewed the final catering count with the venue coordinator and the number was 203. I stood at the edge of the aisle in a dark gray suit and watched my son wait at the altar. He looked like his mother around the eyes. Vanessa came down the aisle in a dress that cost more than my first car. I paid for that too. I'm not complaining, I'm just being precise. The ceremony lasted 40 minutes. It was beautiful. I cried once briefly when the officiant mentioned the people we carry with us who are no longer here. I didn't bother to hide it. The reception moved inside to a long hall with vaulted ceilings and chandeliers. The catering was extraordinary. The band was a 9-piece from Nashville. Everyone was drinking and dancing, and the light through the tall windows was the color of honey. About 90 minutes into the reception, I was standing near the bar when Vanessa found me. She had been drinking, not sloppy, but enough that the assessment in her eyes had softened into something more impatient. She was still in her dress. She touched my arm and said she needed to talk to me about something. I followed her to a quieter corner near the entrance hall. She said she and Andrew had been thinking about their future, about where they wanted to build their life, about space and stability and starting a family. She said she thought it made sense for them to move into my house in Charlotte, Eastover, She said a property like that appreciated consistently and that Andrew could commute if necessary and that I could, at my stage of life, be looking at some very comfortable continuing care communities that had opened in the area. She was suggesting I move out of my home so that she and my son could move in. I kept my face very still. I have been in enough negotiations over the years to know that the person who reacts first loses something. I said I would think about it. She said, and I want to be precise about this because it matters, she said that it would really be the responsible thing to do, that I was 63 and living alone in a large house, and that it was a lot of upkeep, and that sometimes older people struggle to see what's practical. She said she hoped I wouldn't let sentiment get in the way of a good decision. I looked at her. She was 29 years old, and she had just told me, in my son's wedding reception, on a day I had paid for, that sentiment was getting in the way of my good decisions. I said I needed to use the restroom. I walked out of the reception hall, through the main lobby of the estate, and out the front door. I stood on the portico in the warm May evening, and I called my attorney, a woman named Judith who had handled my legal affairs for over 15 years. I told her I needed to execute a document we had discussed in January. She asked if I was sure. I said I was. I also called my financial advisor. I told him to initiate certain transfers we had discussed. He asked when. I said Monday morning. He said understood. Then I called the general manager of my company and told him to begin the process of restructuring Andrew's employment. Andrew was a vice president of finance at my company. He had been there for 4 years. I told the general manager that Andrew's role was being eliminated and that standard severance would apply. He was quiet for a moment and then said he would handle it. I stood there for another minute. The Spanish moss moved in the warm air. Somewhere inside, the band was playing something I recognized but couldn't name. I went back inside. I found Andrew on the dance floor. I waited at the edge until the song ended, and then I asked him to walk with me for a minute. He looked happy, flushed from dancing. He followed me to a side corridor off the main hall. I told him what Vanessa had said to me, not my interpretation, her exact words as closely as I could recall them. He didn't look surprised. That told me something. He said she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. He said she just cared about what was best for everyone. He said I had to understand that she was practical and forward-thinking, and that sometimes the way she said things came across harder than she intended. He said he hoped I would be open to having a real conversation about it. I said I had already had the real conversation. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen on his face before, a kind of defiance, but thin, like it was covering over something he didn't want me to see. He said, "Dad, why do you always have to make things complicated?" I looked at my son. I thought about 38 years of work, about the house where he grew up, about the ring, about $210,000, about his mother's garden. I said, "I'm not the one who made this complicated." I went back to the reception. I had a glass of bourbon. I danced once briefly with Vanessa's mother, who was better company than I expected. I said goodnight to Andrew and Vanessa at 9:30, told them congratulations, and meant it genuinely, not for my own sake, but because I still believed at that moment that they might figure out how to be decent to each other and to the world. I was back at my hotel by 10. I sat on the balcony and watched the lights on the harbor. Monday morning, the transfers happened. By Wednesday, Andrew's position at the company had been formally eliminated. He received a letter outlining his severance package, 12 weeks, standard for his tenure. By Friday, he had called me 4 times. I answered the 4th call. He asked what I had done. I told him. He said I had overreacted. He said Vanessa had just been trying to start a conversation, and I had turned it into something it wasn't. He said I was punishing both of them because of a misunderstanding. He said I was being vindictive. I said I wasn't being vindictive. I was being accurate. He said he wanted to come up to Charlotte and talk. I said he was welcome to come. He came the following weekend with Vanessa. They arrived at my house on Saturday morning, and I made coffee and we sat in the living room. Vanessa looked at the built-in bookcases. She looked at the stone fireplace. She looked at the ceiling. She was doing an inventory. She told me she had not meant any offense at the wedding. She said she was just thinking about what made sense long term. She used the word practical 3 times in the first 5 minutes. I told her I understood what she had meant. I said I didn't need her to explain it again. Andrew asked about his job. I told him the role had been eliminated as part of a restructuring I had been planning for some time. That was partly true. The timing had accelerated, but the structural change was real. He had been in a role that had outgrown its usefulness, and I should have addressed it sooner. He said that felt convenient. I said it felt honest. Vanessa asked about the house. She asked it carefully, delicately, with a different tone than she had used at the reception. She said she hoped nothing she had said had affected my long-term plans for the property. I said it had, in a way. I told her that in January I had updated my estate documents, and that the house was now held in a trust with specific conditions around its disposition. The property would not pass directly and without condition to Andrew upon my death. It would instead fund a scholarship at Ohio State in my parents' names, with a residual distributed to Andrew after a 10-year holding period, managed by a trustee who was not a family member. She looked at me for a long time. Andrew looked at me for a long time. Andrew looked at me. I said I want to be clear that this was not a decision I made at the reception. I made it in January, when I first started to understand what kind of future you both had planned for me. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Andrew said, "You knew?" I said I had seen enough. He looked down at his coffee cup. Vanessa looked out the window at my wife's garden, which I had kept exactly as she left it, because some things you don't move, and some things you don't give away, no matter who asks. They left that afternoon. Andrew called me 2 weeks later, alone, without Vanessa, and we talked for a long time. It wasn't a good conversation. It was an honest one. Those are not always the same thing. He said he felt like he had spent years trying to meet a standard I never fully explained. I told him the standard was simple. Treat people with the respect you'd want for yourself. He said Vanessa wasn't a bad person. I said I didn't think she was bad. I thought she was clear about what she wanted, and I respected that clarity. Even when it was directed at me. We didn't resolve everything that afternoon. I don't expect we will. Quickly. But he called me last month on a Sunday just to talk. Not about money, not about the house, not about the will. Just to talk. He asked how the garden was doing. I told him the roses were coming back strong, and that I'd had to put in some new soil around the hydrangeas his mother had planted in the northwest corner. He said he remembered those hydrangeas. I said I did too. You build things in this life. Roads, houses, families. The quality of what you build depends on the materials and on the honesty of the work. You can't cut corners and expect it to hold. You can't hand something valuable to someone who doesn't understand its worth and be surprised when they treat it carelessly. That's not cruelty. That's engineering. I am 63 years old, and I live alone in a house full of things that matter to me. The built-in bookcases, my wife's garden, the reading chair in the corner of the study, the photograph of my parents on the mantelpiece. Some things you protect, not because of pride, not because of spite, because they are worth protecting, and because there is no one else who will. If your child has ever chosen someone else's opinion of you over their own memory of who you are, you know what I mean. And if they haven't yet, I hope they never do. But if they do, I want you to know that it doesn't have to be the end of the story. It wasn't the end of mine. I've been thinking about that Saturday morning a lot lately. The pink sky over the water, the coffee going cold, while I sat on the balcony thinking about my wife. There was a moment, right there, before the day started, in earnest, when everything was still quiet, and I knew, not with anger, but with a kind of calm certainty, that something was about to break and I was going to have to decide what I was made of. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. It's not that the hard decisions get easier. It's that you've made enough of them that you're no longer surprised by the weight. What Vanessa did at that reception wasn't an accident. It wasn't nerves or champagne or a poorly worded comment. It was a test. She wanted to know whether I was the kind of man who would hand over what he'd spent his life building because someone used the word practical in a confident enough tone. A lot of people would have. I understand that. The pressure of the moment, the desire to keep the peace, the fear of being the difficult one. These are real forces. I've felt them, but I've also learned, the hard way, that every time you let someone talk you out of what you know to be true, you don't just lose the thing in front of you. You lose a little of your own sense of what's real. Andrew is a smart man. That's not the question. The question is what a person does with their intelligence, whether they use it to see clearly or to construct comfortable explanations for what they already want to believe. For a long time, my son used it for the second thing. He's been working on the first. I can see it when we talk now. It's slow and it's real, and I'm patient. I think about the choices I made too. I gave Andrew too much too easily, and I did it out of love. But love delivered without expectation of effort has a way of teaching the wrong lesson. He didn't learn the weight of things because I carried too much of it for him. That's on me. A man with genuine integrity doesn't just demand it from others. He looks hard at his own role in what went wrong and doesn't flinch from what he finds. I found some things I didn't like. I'm still working on them. What kept me standing on that portico making those calls, calm, clear, without rage, wasn't spite. It was 38 years of learning that the world responds to what you actually do, not to what you meant or what you wish you'd done. You put good work into a bridge, it holds. You cut corners, eventually it doesn't. That principle doesn't change because it's your family instead of your job. If anything, it matters more. The house is still mine. The garden is coming back strong. Andrew called last Sunday. Some things you protect, some things you give time. The wisdom is knowing the difference, and the strength is doing what the difference requires, even when it costs you something. That's all I know. It's been enough.